My multivariate presentation is entitled Trust in South African Governing Institutions. South Africa has a history of social instability arising from political decisions such as apartheid, which forced blacks into poverty while privileging whites. Since the abolishment of apartheid, the country has been plagued by unemployment and public sector corruption. Given these conditions, my research seeks to determine which factors affect trust in South Africa's governing institutions. My analytic approach uses the Afrobarometer 2005 to 2006 dataset with a sample size of 2,400 for South Africa. The specific techniques I employ include indexing, multiple regression, and elaboration through hierarchical regression. To measure trust in governing institutions, I created an index of 7 ordinal level variables that measure trust in the presidency, parliament, electoral commission, local council, the African National Congress, which is the ruling party, police, and the courts. Based on the alpha of 0.85, I concluded that these variables form a reliable index. My first hypothesis is that perceived national economic condition positively influences trust. Specifically, respondents will credit governing institutions for management of the national economy, and better perceptions of economic condition will cause respondents to place greater trust in the institution's management abilities. This hypothesis is based on Paul Iragama's research finding that Nigerian respondents who have better perceptions of the government's performance managing the economy are significantly more likely to trust the government. Because South Africa and Nigeria both have large populations in relation to the African continent, similar political systems, and problems with corruption, I expect to find similar results in South Africa. My second hypothesis is that interest in public affairs positively influences trust. Specifically, respondents who are interested in public affairs feel more attachment to the public dialogue about political issues in South Africa and will view governing institutions as more trustworthy since they are responsible for managing these issues. Again, Iragama's research supports this hypothesis because interest in public affairs was found to significantly increase trust in the Nigerian government. Given the similarities in freedom and quantity of media between Nigeria and South Africa, I expect that interest in public affairs will also positively affect trust in South Africa. My third hypothesis is that satisfaction with democracy positively influences trust. Specifically, respondents who are content with the operation of democracy will accept the authority of political institutions within the governing process as legitimate, and therefore place greater trust in these institutions. This hypothesis is based on Marcia Grimes' research finding that perceptions regarding an authority's willingness to engage in public dialogue, explicate and justify their own decisions, and address citizens' concerns are central to citizens' trust of the authority. Because these are crucial aspects of any democracy, I expect to find similar results in South Africa. I combined these 3 independent variables, perception of national economic condition, interest in public affairs, and satisfaction with democracy, into one model and tested its effects on trust using multiple regression. Based on the multiple regression results, the only variable with strong predictive power is satisfaction with democracy, with a b-value of 0.457 and a beta value of 0.402. The adjusted R-square value indicates that this model accounts for about 23% of variance in trust in governing institutions. Most of this is likely due to the strong predictive power of satisfaction with democracy. And with a sample size of 1,209, these results can be generalized to the broader South African population. My results prove hypotheses 1 and 2 correct, but perception of national economic condition and interest in public affairs are very weak predictors of trust. According to their low beta values, a 1-category increase in each of these variables produces only about 1/10 of a category increase in trust. These results are inconsistent with Iragama's findings of strong predictive power for these variables. This suggests important differences between Nigeria and South Africa that could be investigated further. Most importantly, my third hypothesis is proven correct. Satisfaction with democracy is a highly statistically significant and very strong predictor of trust. This result is consistent with Marcia Grimes' finding that satisfaction with the operation of critical aspects of democracy positively influences trust in governing institutions. However, additional research led me to hypothesize that there is an intervening variable at work. I hypothesized that this variable is perception of corruption. Melgar, Rossi, and Smith find that respondents who have a more favorable opinion of domestic democracy are less likely to perceive high levels of corruption. In turn, Mishler and Rose's research finds that perception of corruption negatively affects trust in government. Because I hypothesize that I will find interpretation, I expect that the predictive strength of satisfaction with democracy will be reduced when controlling for perception of corruption through hierarchical regression. To measure this control variable, I created an index of perceived corruption within several important institutions: the presidency, parliament, local council, police, and the judiciary. The alpha of 0.83 indicates that these variables form a reliable index which can be added to the 3 previous independent variables to form my second explanatory model. The hierarchical regression results indicate that the beta value of satisfaction with democracy decreases only slightly from 0.402 to 0.365. However, perception of corruption is a significant, fairly strong predictor of trust in governing institutions, with a beta value of negative 0.25. As well, when perception of corruption is introduced through hierarchical regression, the explained variance in trust in governing institutions increases from 23% to 29%, indicating that when perception of corruption is included in the regression analysis, a substantial amount of variance in trust is accounted for. Based on these hierarchical regression results, my interpretation hypothesis is proven incorrect because the beta value of satisfaction with democracy is not reduced by more than 1/3 when controlling for perception of corruption. Therefore, I have found replication instead of interpretation. Although perception of corruption does not have mediating effects as I hypothesized, I can conclude that it has strong negative effects on trust, which is consistent with Mishler and Rose's findings in post-communist countries. Because post-communist countries and South Africa underwent major political reforms at the end of the 20th century, perhaps Mishler and Rose's conclusion that perceived corruption negatively affects trust can be extended to other countries with similar political developments. Further research should examine this potential effect in other countries. In light of the social and political conditions of South Africa, the purpose of my research was to determine which factors influence trust in governing institutions of South Africa. My research suggests that South African officials should focus on strengthening democracy and reducing corruption if they wish to gain the trust of the general population. South African political leaders should introduce additional democratic reforms that increase citizens' satisfaction with democracy and ultimately increase trust in governing institutions. As well, politicians should crack down on corruption within public institutions, as such actions are likely to decrease citizens' perception of rampant corruption and thereby increase trust in governing institutions. This is my bibliography. Thank you for watching my presentation.